Yes, as you said, I've been living in China for just over 20 years at this point in time. And when I went there, one of the privileges that I had was to try and create the consulting industry in China. Because actually, back in the early 1990s, consulting wasn't legal in China, although we hadn't bothered to check that before we showed up. And so we had to find out how to register a legal entity, how to do it without creating a joint venture, because for better or worse, McKinsey doesn't do joint ventures. And then we had to work out how to explain what we do, not just to potential clients, but to future colleagues. You know, at that point in time, everyone graduating from the university got a, encouraged position to go work for the government or go work for a state-owned enterprise. So we had to get them to step out of that. And one thing you did become was actually pretty good at describing what it is that McKinsey does. And I think a lot of what I've done over the last 20 years is about building a business myself, not just advising other people on that. What I wanted to talk about today was, where at this point in time, I see, the economy heading overall, and then push down a little bit into where we might see the next wave of opportunities, because certainly some industries are actually getting relatively mature in China at this point, and the number of industries that are about to go through the inflection point, the S-curve of 4 or 5 years of 50-60% growth, where just being in the right place at the right time is the key to success. It's going to be a new set of industries over the next 4 or 5 years. So what are the key elements in the trends? Clearly you've got to frame, what role is the government playing? And certainly the consistency of purpose around a push towards domestic-driven growth, consumption-driven growth, services-driven growth is there. And it is happening, but it's happening slowly and steadily. And given how dependent the economy has been on infrastructure, it's not going to change overnight. The other thing that I think I would just highlight from the government's actions at the moment is, the anti-corruption initiative is still going strong. And I think it's certainly in terms of the local level government officials' conspicuous consumption, it's a fact of life going forward. No one expects that there'll ever be a return to the era of very high level conspicuous consumption by local government officials. And that does create some interesting challenges down the road because, of course, government officials get paid relatively little. And therefore, the relative attractiveness of being a government official is diminished in the same way that the relative attractiveness of being a teacher, relative attractiveness of being a doctor in China has become very low over the last 20 years. Because those jobs used to have enormous status, and in a society where income levels for everyone were low, that was great. But in a society where the sales agent coming to the hospital to sell the drugs gets paid 3 times what the doctor gets paid, why would the doctor be the doctor? I'll talk a little bit about the middle class becoming the mainstream, and and how that is continuing to drive overall consumption. The fragmentation of urban markets. What that means for businesses is an ongoing process of cost increases and margin pressures, and so we see much more focus on, to use the broad word, productivity. Whether you're a multinational, a private Chinese company, or in many ways, most excitingly, state-owned enterprises actually care about productivity now, and really they never have in the past. Digital, the pace of digital disruption in the economy in China is, if anything, faster than we see in the West, whether it's particularly in the emergence of online retail. and what that is doing to disrupt physical retail. And as I'll touch on, in some cities, you may never get modern retail as we've known it. I mean, the malls haven't been built, and they may never get built at this point. Local innovation. We are seeing a tipping point in a number of industries, and I'll highlight a few. Solar energy, wind farms, wind turbines, medical equipment, where you're seeing genuine innovation by Chinese companies today. And then I'll close with a little bit of what could go wrong. I think on balance, we're continuing to, in all likelihood, have a 6-7% growth year. But there are some discontinuities that could come there. Out of the plenum, I'd say first and foremost, actions from the plenum last year have actually been pretty slow in implementation. And we hear a lot about the new authority and strength of leadership of Xi and his team. But there's still a lot of checks and balances, particularly when it comes to dealing with the economy. And so while they've moved on the market mechanism in terms of raising prices of a lot of utility inputs, energy, water, land, capital, minimum wages. In terms of streamlining relationships, in terms of actually introducing more private capital, that's going very, very slowly. Very little has been happened on that. In terms of the urban residential rights for citizens from the countryside, also going very slowly in terms of pace of change. This slide just illustrates where we're headed with the evolution of the middle class. This is why when some product categories in China have the cognac guy is probably the most extreme. They've seen 60-70% reduction in demand as a result of the anti-corruption. Mercedes has continued to see double-digit growth. BMW sees double-digit growth. So cars are being bought by the middle class. Vast majority. They're not being bought by government officials. And it just illustrates the strength of consumption power of this middle class that's buying the homes, often buying multiple homes, buying cars, buying the iPhone. I mean, Apple now sells $25 billion of product in China to Chinese consumers, up from, by the way, almost zero 4 years ago. They only started to take the market seriously after Tim Cook took over. But the depth of consuming capacity in the middle class there, is very, very strong, and is the most important underpinning driving the growth of the economy going forward. But is that the pivot on that is if these middle class consumers lose confidence, if these guys lose confidence, they could easily pull back the spending. And remember, there hasn't really been a recession in China for more than 20 years. So you have to be 40, 45 to have experienced a recession while you've been in the workforce. And what many government officials are so hyper concerned about is overreaction from unsophisticated consumers. And you see this all the time, whether it's the reaction to wealth management products and defaults, whether it's reaction to a fear of drop in housing prices. And so the government is very much framing its actions around how do we sustain consumer confidence. And at some point, this will become a very difficult pressure to deal with. Moving in, the middle class, those middle class folks that I've just been describing, historically were, predominantly in the tier 1 cities that we tend to visit. But looking forward, all the new citizens coming into this class are in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Yes, they'll still largely be coastal, within 500 miles of the coast, but it will be another 60 to 100 cities where these citizens are. That creates a lot more complexity in building your business and running your operations in China. I mentioned earlier that a lot of industries are growing a lot more slowly. The golden era of communications, of steel production, of chemicals and the like, is past. These are yes, they're still growing, and maybe by European standards, these are nice, exciting growth numbers. But by Chinese standards, these are very mature industry growth numbers, 6, 7, 8, anything that's single digit. And this is where, throw money at the problem, throw people at the problem no longer works. And so they're having to become much more sophisticated in how they operate, and bringing in a lot more international talents in many ways. I touched on the pressure that we're seeing in terms of, water, real estate, wages. Let me just touch on wages, because in many ways there's two wage economies going on in China today. There's actually a shortage of skilled factory workers. There's a shortage of skilled factory workers. So, even as the government pushes up the minimum wage, it's actually doesn't have to push very hard, because factories are having to pay more just to find people and attract them. But the second wage phenomena is for university graduates. University graduates in 2014 are getting paid the same they were paid in 2008. In fact, may actually be getting paid less than 2008. There's 7 million graduates a year. There's maybe 1.5 million get jobs that require being a graduate. There's 5 million of these folks that are coming out of university every year and are really struggling to find a job. They end up in call centers. They end up selling insurance. They're insurance agents. Very high level of frustration. And in fact, the wages have crossed over. If you're a skilled factory worker, you will get paid more than one of these second-tier graduates coming out doing a white-collar job. But there's a prestige problem. Graduates can't go work in factories. That's a pressure that's building up in the economy, and it's certainly one of the things that concerns me and that I worry about. As a result of these increased costs, profits going down, I just wanted to sort of bring that to life. We're still in positive territory, but your typical state-owned enterprise is about 40% less profitable than it was 3 or 4 years ago. E-tailing, what's going on with e-commerce? Couple of examples. If you live in a tier 3 city and you've got income, and you say, I want to buy, a branded handbag, a Coach handbag. There is no Coach store in that city. The department store doesn't have it. You buy it online, and it gets delivered the next day. And that's how you become accustomed to buying your luxury goods. It's how you become accustomed to buying all of your electronics, your clothing. And now in the first-tier cities, it's how you become accustomed to buying your groceries as well. I'm not going to claim I'm typical, but, we don't go to the supermarket anymore. Everything gets, from... And it's not just from these mass market. There's all of these niche online players too. So it can be from the online, from the organic farm, delivering directly to your home. The convenience factor, the comfort factor, is just really, really, really high. And even there's a couple of other things that are going on with this. The economic model of running a mall in China is typically you take a percentage of revenue of the stores that are in your mall. So the customer comes into the mall, has their mobile phone, they look it up online, they try it on there. They may just order it online. There's nothing much you can do about it. But you may actually find that the store has iPads or tablets in there and says, why don't you order it online rather than buying it from me? Because it's actually a higher margin for the retailer to have you buy it online than buy it in the store. So, Burberry's is a great example because they explicitly do this. And so they're now, essentially, under the old model, they're renting their space for free because they have no revenue in the store. It's kind of interesting dynamic. The second thing that I'd really highlight is the cross-border aspects of this. What Alibaba and JD and others are doing. 60% of small packages going into Russia are Chinese e-commerce sites shipping products into Russia at this point. Southeast Asia is starting to see the same thing. The Chinese companies have set up local language websites, Alibaba, JD, and the others. They're doing it in India now. And they've got the logistics infrastructure and the cost structure and the supply chain to fundamentally disrupt retail in Malaysia or Indonesia. And I actually think we're going to see some interesting geopolitical challenges with this going forward. I talked about innovation. Biotech. These Chinese companies are staffed with PhDs from MIT, from Caltech, and the like. They've come back. They're taken advantage of the availability of enormous amounts of funding to back them in China. They've got world-class research facilities, and the ability to test drugs in China is actually a very benign environment. It's very easy to, if you're a Chinese company, to bring drugs out into the market to test and do it at a pace that you just can't do in the US. So you're seeing new cancer drugs, you're seeing new diabetes drugs, which is a big problem in China, coming to life. Seeing innovation in a lot of these medical products. Newsoft, started as a supplier to Philips. Worked out that of these medical devices they would manufacture, they were contracted to develop the software for Philips medical devices. They realized over time that 90% of the value add was in the software. So they actually just flipped it round and started getting someone to manufacture the devices with their software put into it. Very competitive. Mindray, $1 billion competing in the market. This just brings it to life a little bit in terms of market share. The orange is the share of a whole set of different markets that are now captured by Chinese. And it's the MRIs, implantables are the stents that you put into your arteries and the like. And basically, if you go into a hospital today in China, the doctor will ask you, do you want the premium or do you want the mass product? And the premium will be the J&J, and the mass will be the Chinese. And share is growing, and they're quality, reliable products. What do businesses worry about in terms of operating in China? Yes, clearly, everyone worries about competition. Multinationals worry a lot more about costs. Chinese companies are rather more optimistic so that they can manage the costs. But the two down here, the Chinese companies are really struggling with, my customers are getting much more sophisticated. Historically, Chinese companies didn't value functional excellence. Trying to find the chief marketing officer or chief branding officer or supply chain, typically you would rotate around. You wouldn't develop a deep expertise. And if anything, what you wanted to be is the general manager of a business unit. That's the definition of success in a Chinese company. And now there's a real recognition, which I think is fantastic, of functional excellence is really, really important. And it's starting with the need to understand the consumer, the need to get information out of what's going on the internet, and how do I deal with that? How do I bring some science into pricing? I mean, most Chinese companies have been completely brute force about how they deal with pricing to this point in time. What could go wrong? Touched on, a little bit as we're going through. This top left is really about students. If you ever go to any of these job fairs in China, they're incredibly depressing events. Just the number of people that are looking for jobs that don't exist. On the banking side of things, I think there's very little chance of a banking crisis. What I do think is there's a very real chance of loss of confidence in a lot of the wealth management products that are out there. Some of that links to the internet, folks, and the pace at which they've developed. On housing, in many cities there is no longer a true market for housing, in the sense that developers aren't able to lower the price. Why are the developers not able to lower the price? Developers aren't able to lower the price because if they lower the price in a building where they've already sold some of the properties, the people they've already sold the properties to come back and demonstrate and cause trouble. That they want a refund, they want a discount down to the new price, and if anything, they want compensation for the fact that the value of the house has gone down over and above the discount. So you see developers holding the line on price, and so the market is getting very, very stuck, basically. And you see many of the developers being very honest. The Vanke CEO earlier this week was saying, I think the era of making money in housing and property development in China's over. You see others just voting with their feet of putting billions of dollars into property developments in Malaysia or coming to London or LA. To me, the property developers ought to be the people who know best what's going on in the housing market. A gradual evolution of price is fine. A discontinuity leading to loss of confidence, that's the big issue that we would be concerned about. And then finally, this is more just the Beijing pollution issue. Beijing isn't the worst city, but it is the most prominent city for pollution in China. I don't think anyone has any doubt it will get cleaned up over time. It's just a question of the patience of citizens for how long it's going to take. Of the three big levers, they've already pulled the easy one of buying out polluting industries. There's no public number on this, but just looking at the number of factories that are gone, anecdotally, people talk about $5 or $6 billion worth of spending by the Beijing government to shut down steel mills in the surrounding province. Since it got so bad. Upgrading the quality of cars, the quality of gasoline, upgrading construction practices, that's going to take a lot longer. So, again, I don't think that's... It just can lead to problems of lack of confidence in Chinese consumers, a lack of willingness to live there, to work there, to study there. I think I touched on the real estate and banking. Yeah. It really does all come down to consumer confidence. Okay, spend a couple of minutes on where I see the new opportunities coming. As I said, most of a successful Chinese economy going forward is driven by domestic growth, urbanization, urban incomes, what do households want. A couple of critical themes supporting that then. One is agricultural modernization, land consolidation, consolidation of land ownership, creation of scale farms that you can industrialize, that you can invest, that it justifies having the basics of tractors, modern seeds, modern fertilizer, modern irrigation to improve yields. And then, the finishing off of the city infrastructure, whether it's public transit. I mean, there's likely to be another 300 billion or so spent on city-level public transport, trams, undergrounds, and the like over the next 10 years, trying to make the cities more user-friendly. Bring this to life, the left-hand side is our sense of how the evolution of GDP growth and private consumption going from only 20%, which is ridiculously and unsustainably low, to hopefully about half. And the growth in services that comes with that. Let me illustrate a little bit on some of these industries. I mean, we talked about e-tailing. On protein, China's protein consumption is growing 5% per annum on a per capita basis. It's still only 100 kilograms a year. Beef imports have grown sixfold over the last 3 years. China's invested $10 billion in soybeans production in Australia and Brazil, sugarcane in Australia, milk in New Zealand. One thing I did want to emphasize here, a lot of this investment, almost all of this investment, is by private Chinese companies. This isn't the state going out and saying, we need to, own cows in New Zealand. It's private entrepreneurs. Actually, it's some of my friends who become wealthy by succeeding in technology. They see agriculture as the next technology opportunity, the equivalent of the next technology opportunity in China, that feeding China's middle class in the way they want, with high quality, safe food and value-added foods. Buying apple farms in Oregon, buying cherry farms in Chile, fish farms in Malaysia. A lot of this goes on below the radar screen because it's $50 million. It's not the $10 billion kind of investments. A lot of it's going on. Until the Ukraine crisis happened, there was this enormous initiative to try and build a dedicated wheat pipeline, or wheat flow from Ukraine, growing it, put it on the ships in the Black Sea, have it come round to a dedicated port up by Tianjin and bring wheat into China. That's obviously a bit off the table at the moment. Milk, it will be another generation before the Chinese middle class trusts domestic milk again. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But convenience, processing, the growth of chilled, the growth of frozen prepared foods, the growth of demand for food processing equipment is actually one of those industries that is on an S-curve right now. It's growing 25% a year, the demand for food processing equipment. The logistics goes a lot with the e-tailing. Private education, you may not realize, private education is actually enormous in China. In the pre-primary, more places are private than state-owned. There's the tutoring side of things that's, like in all parts of North Asia, enormous. Online learning become very, very large. And private universities is an established part of the Chinese education system. Private healthcare. There were 1,500 private hospitals opened in China last year. 1,500 private hospitals opened last year. This is a classic of Chinese government saying, we need to improve the performance of our sector, so we open it up to private participation. We open it up to foreign participation. We could all go open a hospital in China today, 100% foreign owned, no problem. Our big challenge would be getting any doctors to work there, but because there's a shortage of doctors. But assuming we could run that, and we could run clinics. You see everything from the Bupas, the Chinese, the American hospital chains, through to private equity playing in this space right now. And my guess is this will run for 3 or 4 years. Then China will say, we've got enough investment, thank you. We don't want to wipe out the domestic guys. And it'll move forward. and we will probably at that point have oversupply. And it may actually be quite unattractive for the foreign investors at that point. I wouldn't be investing in the hospitals right now. I might invest in building the hospitals, but running them would be is likely to be relatively low returns unless you're careful. Tourism, obviously, people have more time. They're traveling domestically. The demand for tourism is very high. We were talking earlier around, how do you stimulate demand for Chinese tourists to come visit Ireland? First, second, and third would be direct flights. The reason so many Chinese go to Istanbul is not because they have a great passion for Turkey. It's because there's direct flights. And there's passion to go to different places, to go to new places is really, really high. And if you can enable that, and it doesn't have to be from Beijing or Shanghai. It could be from Chengdu. It can be from Guangzhou. It makes an incredible difference. Entertainment, there's about 1,000 new cinemas opened in China every year. Most of them are very luxury, high-end. You pay $15 US to go watch your 3D movie in IMAX in China. It's the second largest movie market in the world at this point. There's a lot of money. Again, just Disney's opening the theme park in Shanghai next year. Just the general theme of demanding middle-class quality kind of services that we're all familiar with, that many Chinese companies are actually struggling to develop and deliver at this point. I'm almost about to close, but there's just one industry that I just want to highlight. If anyone ever asks, if anyone ever starts to say, look, no one makes any money in China, just remind them about the automotive industry. The short version of this is one third of the global automotive industry profits are made in China. And if you're selling luxury cars, it's almost half of the global industry profitability is made in China. It's been a fantastic decade if you're BMW or Audi. Guess at some point this is likely to end. But right now, they're making $30 billion of profits in China. I talk more about consumer than industrial. Opportunities for industrial tend to be less at this point because they're many of the more mature sectors. The smart cities, I think, is still there as an opportunity. Working with and partnering with Chinese companies as they go global is an opportunity. And at some point, the privatization wave will pick up again. Local governments need to monetize the assets they have to pay down debts. And some of the remaining assets they have is less and less land and more businesses. And so they may not be particularly high performing. And you'll have to be selective and thoughtful about how to participate. But there's a lot of both Chinese and international private equity looking at those opportunities at this point. So that's where I'd like to close the summary and then open it up for questions and conversations. Net, I do think, the base case we should all have is the economy will continue to grow at the 5 to 6% a year going forward. I do think there's some stresses that are building up because of the government's avoidance of taking bolder actions that could reduce the confidence of the Chinese middle class and the consumers, and that at some point that's going to create a bit of a discontinuity, but that's likely quite a number of years down the road. So thank you.